Representative Roy, you supported rejecting the 2020 election results even after the attack on the Capitol. You have forced multiple government shutdowns, and you have obstructed every bipartisan solution for the border. Can you identify a single thing you have actually achieved for the American people other than turmoil? Representative Roy began to speak, attempting to interrupt, but Representative Crockett continued directly. I possess your complete voting history right here, and I would very much like to hear your defense of it. At that specific moment, every observer understood that the aggressor had finally encountered someone who would not retreat. 60 minutes earlier, Representative Roy had entered the House Rules Committee chamber with his customary confidence. This was his preferred setting, a compact committee where he could control the proceedings, cut off colleagues, perform grandstanding maneuvers for the television cameras, and generally cause discomfort for everyone else while casting himself as a conservative fighter. The panel was convening for an urgent review regarding a stopgap spending measure to fund the government, a routine matter. Since Republicans held the majority on the committee, Roy and his conservative allies could delay every action, issue demands, and threaten to defeat the legislation unless their terms were accepted. Roy cherished these opportunities, the public attention, the political leverage, the chance to show off for his supporters. He was seated in his regular position, reclining in his chair with his arms folded, representing the image of legislative obstruction. Other committee members arrived sequentially and took their seats, Republicans conversational with one another while Democrats appeared exhausted before the proceeding even commenced. They all anticipated what was coming. Hours of Chip Roy cutting people off, speaking over them, adopting a condescending tone, insisting upon the floor, challenging everything, and generally being difficult. It was his established public identity. What Chip Roy did not realize was that Democratic leaders had made a strategic decision regarding committee assignments for that legislative session. They placed Jasmine Crockett on the Rules Committee specifically because they required an individual who would not be intimidated by individuals like Roy, someone who would actively resist. The opening 3/4 of an hour proceeded precisely as anticipated. Roy cut off a Democratic colleague after only 3 sentences of his introductory remarks. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman." The Democrat attempted to press forward, but Roy raised his voice, repeating, "Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order." The Republican chairman sighed and recognized the gentleman to state his point of order. Roy's point of order was trivial, a procedural challenge that led nowhere, but it had achieved its intended goal, disrupting the Democrat's presentation, breaking his concentration, and demonstrating control. Roy repeated this tactic 10 minutes later and again 15 minutes after that. When a female Democratic representative tried to discuss funding for veterans, Roy cut her off within seconds. "Mr. Chairman, I suspect the gentlewoman fails to grasp how the budgetary process actually functions." The representative, a newly elected member, hesitated and tried to proceed, but Roy continued to speak over her. She eventually gave up her remaining time, visibly flustered and irritated. Roy smiled. This was his standard operating procedure and the source of his perceived power. The Republicans present on the committee found it amusing. They did not necessarily hold affection for Roy. In fact, most of them found him just as irritating as the Democrats did, but he was strategically useful to them. He voiced the arguments they desired but were unwilling to articulate themselves. He absorbed the criticism and acted the part of the antagonist. The Democrats were irritated but had accepted the situation. This was simply the reality of dealing with Chip Roy. He could not be stopped, only endured. Jasmine Crockett observed all of this silently, recording observations and analyzing Roy's patterns, specifically the way he cut off people, the particular colleagues he targeted, and the differing tone he employed with women compared to men. She was analyzing his behavior. Then it became her turn to speak. Crockett introduced an amendment with clear language designed to shield veterans' benefits from any potential reductions, a straightforward concept that would be difficult to oppose. She completed exactly 1.5 sentences. "Mr. Chairman, point of order," Roy's voice interjected across the room. Crockett continued talking, refusing to stop or even glance at him, simply continuing to read her amendment text. Roy spoke more loudly, repeating, Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order. Crockett, still maintaining her focus and not looking at him, stated clearly and evenly, I have the floor, Mr. Roy. You will have your turn. She pressed on with her amendment presentation. Roy actually lifted slightly from his seat, demanding that the gentlewoman must yield for his point of order. Crockett finally glanced at him, her voice remaining calm. I have not yielded, and I will not yield to an individual who has cut off 6 colleagues in the last 60 minutes. You are capable of waiting. The entire chamber became silent. No one addressed Chip Roy in that manner. The chairman moved uneasily. Mr. Roy, the gentlewoman currently possesses the floor. Roy sat back down, though his expression was darkening. Very well, but this proposed amendment is absurd. Crockett, her voice remaining pleasant, almost friendly, interjected, I am still speaking, Mr. Roy. In Texas, we learned proper manners growing up. You might consider trying it sometime. Audible responses spread around the chamber, suppressed laughter mixed with sharp gasps of breath. Someone had just openly ridiculed Chip Roy to his face. Roy's voice became louder. Do not lecture me concerning Texas. I will lecture you concerning interrupting women, which you do consistently. Now sit down and await your turn like a mature adult. Roy erupted, stating that he did not have to accept this lack of respect. Crockett immediately cut him off. Then stop disrespecting every single woman present in this room. You interrupt us, you speak over us, you are condescending to us. I am finished tolerating it. The other Democrats were now listening intently, sitting up straighter as someone was finally articulating what they had all been thinking. The Republicans appeared uncomfortable. Roy's conduct, which had previously been background noise they tolerated, was suddenly prominent, clear, and undeniable. The chairman made a weak attempt to intervene, suggesting they all maintain proper decorum. I concur, Crockett stated. Mr. Roy ought to try maintaining some. Roy attempted to regain authority over the situation, adopting his formal procedural voice. If the gentlewoman would yield for a query. Crockett responded, I will not yield to an individual who interrupts colleagues as standard practice, but I will engage with your substance if you possess any. Roy's jaw tightened visibly. My substance? Let us discuss your amendment, which is entirely superfluous. Actually, Crockett interjected, turning his own maneuver back against him, let us talk concerning your record because you have dedicated this entire proceeding to criticizing everyone else's amendments and concepts. I would like to identify what you have actually achieved other than forcing government shutdowns and voting to overturn elections. She reached down and extracted a folder, thick, meticulously organized, and fitted with colored index tabs. Because I have questions regarding your record, Mr. Roy. A great many questions. Roy's face was completely crimson now. I am not obligated to answer to you. Crockett's voice was calm, controlled, and devastating. You are correct. You are obligated to answer to the American people, and they are observing right now. She directed attention toward the C-SPAN camera. So let us begin with January 6th. You voted to reject the 2020 election results, even following the insurrection. After law enforcement was assaulted, after we all witnessed the violence, you still voted to reject Pennsylvania's electoral ballots. Clarify that for the American public. Roy glanced at the chairman, silently pleading for intervention. The chairman kept his gaze fixed downward on his paperwork. He was not going to protect Roy from this line of questioning. That inquiry is irrelevant to this committee's business, Roy attempted. Crockett shot back. You made it relevant when you challenged my character and my amendment. Now I am questioning yours. Crockett opened her folder. January 6th, you were present in the chamber. You observed what occurred. You were evacuated and then you returned and voted to overturn the election anyway. Why? Roy's mouth moved, but no coherent answer materialized. Crockett raised an eyebrow. No answer? Then let us discuss all the other matters you cannot clarify because we have the time and I possess the proof. Chip Roy, the Freedom Caucus warrior, Fox News regular, and self-proclaimed conservative fighter, realized something terrible. He had finally initiated a conflict with someone who would resist, and he was completely unready for it. Jasmine Crockett flipped to the initial tab section in her folder. The tab read January 6th in neat handwriting. Mr. Roy, January 6th, 2021, I want to establish a chronological timeline. At 2:13 p.m., the Capitol was breached. By 2:30, we were all secured in lockdown. By 2:45, we had seen the video footage, police being assaulted, windows shattered, a mob searching for members of Congress. Were you conscious of all this? Roy shifted in his chair. Naturally, I was aware. Crockett pulled out a transcript. Good. So you knew it constituted an insurrection. You knew people were being harmed. You knew democracy was under assault. And yet when we reconvened at 8:06 p.m. after the Capitol was secured, after we had all viewed the full horror of it, you voted to reject Pennsylvania's electoral ballots. Why? I harbored legitimate constitutional concerns concerning what concerns? Crockett's interruption was sharp and precise. Be specific. What constitutional issue justified overturning an election after a violent mob attempted to do the exact same thing? Roy tried his rehearsed talking points. There were irregularities in the electoral process, questions regarding procedures. Identify one. Identify one specific irregularity in Pennsylvania that would have altered 80,000 votes. That is the margin Biden won by. Identify one. Roy remained silent, his mouth opening and closing as he glanced at his notes. You cannot, Crockett said quietly, because there were none. 63 courts affirmed that. Trump's own attorney general confirmed that. Every state election official stated that, but you voted to overturn the election anyway. She extracted another document, an old press release. You know who else spearheaded the effort to nullify the election? Your former superior, Ted Cruz. You were serving as his chief of staff when he announced he would object to the Electoral College certification. Did you assist in planning that strategy? Roy's expression tightened. I was employed by Senator Cruz, but I made my own choices. Crockett held up the press release. Did you, though? Because your floor address on January 6th, the one you delivered at 9:47 p.m. following the insurrection, contains remarkably similar phrasing to Cruz's talking points. It is almost as though someone with experience authoring Cruz's speeches authored yours as well. Oh, wait, that was you. She read directly from the transcript. We must ensure the integrity of our electoral processes and address the legitimate concerns of millions of Americans. She read Cruz's statement from earlier that same day. We must address the serious allegations and ensure electoral integrity for millions of concerned Americans. Identical words, identical structure, identical nonsense. That is not, Roy began. You coordinated with Cruz. You helped strategize the objections. This was not some spontaneous constitutional worry. This was a calculated effort to nullify an election, and you were involved from the beginning. Crockett shifted slightly in her seat, leaning forward. But here is what truly bothers me, Mr. Roy. You label yourself a law and order conservative. You talk about supporting law enforcement. You include Blue Lives Matter in your social media biography. But on January 6th, 140 police officers sustained injuries, some will never fully recover, and one died, and you sided with the mob that assaulted them. Roy tried to object, claiming he never supported violence. Crockett's voice was firm. You granted them legitimacy. By voting to object after they attacked, you signaled to them that their violence was worthwhile, that it accomplished something, that their cause was justified. You can claim you do not endorse violence, but your actions that evening state otherwise. She extracted more recent statements, tweets, and interviews Roy had provided, and you have dedicated the years since to minimizing it. You have labeled the January 6th committee a partisan political attack. You have defended the rioters as political prisoners. You voted against awarding medals to the officers who protected us that day. Roy's voice rose defensively. I believe individuals are being unfairly persecuted for... Crockett's voice cut through. They attacked law enforcement. They broke into the Capitol. They attempted to halt the certification of a free and fair election. That is not persecution when they are prosecuted. That is justice. She consolidated her January 6th materials and set them aside. But fine. Perhaps you believe the election objection was based on principle. Perhaps you believe the rioters were merely concerned citizens. Let us discuss what you have achieved since then. Let us talk about your actual legislative record in Congress. She extracted a new section from her folder. Because you have been here 3 years now, and in that time you have become well known for one thing: obstruction. You shut things down, you block initiatives, you create chaos, but you never actually build anything. Crockett opened to a page marked McCarthy. Let us start with Kevin McCarthy. You voted against him for Speaker 15 times. You paralyzed the House for 4 days. What were you attempting to achieve? Roy sat back, crossing his arms again. I was fighting for conservative principles and necessary reforms. Which reforms? What did you actually obtain? What concessions were worth paralyzing Congress for 4 days? Roy answered, we secured commitments to fiscal restraint, to altering House rules. Crockett interrupted, you obtained promises McCarthy broke within weeks, but you certainly secured a lot of Fox News interviews, did you not? She extracted a chart displaying Fox News appearances. January 2023, you were on Fox 27 times in a single month, more than any other member of Congress, discussing your battle against McCarthy, your principled stand, your conservative purity. But what did the American people receive? A delayed House, delayed committee assignments, delayed work on actual issues. Roy tried to defend himself, stating they were holding leadership accountable. Crockett's voice was flat. You were performing for television. Because here is what occurred after McCarthy finally became Speaker. You voted for the exact same things you stated you would oppose. The debt ceiling agreement, you voted no, but only after it possessed sufficient votes to pass. The appropriations bills, you complained, but eventually voted yes. You obtained nothing but publicity. She proceeded to the next tab marked debt ceiling. But the McCarthy fight was merely theater. Let us discuss actual hostage-taking. The debt ceiling crisis of 2023. You were one of the loudest voices threatening to default on America's financial obligations. You were prepared to destroy the full faith and credit of the United States unless Democrats accepted massive reductions. That is not governing, Mr. Roy. That is economic terrorism. Roy's face reddened. We were fighting against reckless spending. Crockett pulled out his voting record. Were you? Because let us look at what you consider reckless. She read from the document. Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy, $2 trillion added to the deficit. You voted yes. Defense spending increases totaling $150 billion over 2 years. You voted yes. Agricultural subsidies for massive agribusinesses. You voted yes. But expanding the child tax credit to assist working families? You voted no. Increasing funding for school lunches? No. Healthcare for veterans? No. Crockett set down the voting record and looked directly at Roy. You are not a fiscal conservative, Mr. Roy. You are comfortable with spending as long as it benefits rich people and defense contractors. You only become concerned about the deficit when the money might assist poor people. Roy sputtered that this was a gross mischaracterization. Crockett continued, Is it? Let us discuss what you wanted to cut during the debt ceiling fight. You demanded work requirements for Medicaid, making it more difficult for poor people to obtain health care. You wanted to reduce SNAP benefits, making it harder for families to purchase food. You wanted to freeze domestic spending, which would have resulted in cuts to everything from education to environmental protection. She leaned forward. But you know what you did not want to cut: defense spending, tax breaks for oil companies, subsidies for wealthy farmers, just programs that assist regular people. That is not fiscal responsibility. That is cruelty disguised as conservatism. Roy tried to respond, but Crockett pressed on. And here is the reality about your debt ceiling stunt. It did not even work. After weeks of threatening default, after alarming financial markets, after risking a recession, you eventually voted for an agreement that gave you almost nothing. You manufactured a crisis, harmed people, damaged America's credibility, and received nothing in return except Fox News clips. She collected the debt ceiling materials. So you voted to overturn an election, you have paralyzed the House multiple times, you have threatened America's credit, but there is one place where your obstruction has real, immediate consequences: your own district. Crockett's voice became quieter and more serious. Let us talk concerning Uvalde. Chip Roy visibly flinched. Jasmine Crockett pulled out photographs, not documents this time. She hoisted the first one showing a school building with colorful murals visible on the walls. Robb Elementary School, Uvalde, Texas, your district, Mr. Roy. May 24th, 2022, 19 children and 2 teachers murdered, the worst school shooting in Texas history. She set down the photo of the school and selected another, a memorial with teddy bears and flowers piled high. I visited Uvalde 6 months after the shooting. I met with families. I observed the memorial. I heard the stories. Her voice was controlled but carried an edge. What did you do, Mr. Roy? Roy shifted uncomfortably. I visited Uvalde multiple times. I spoke with families. I attended memorials. Crockett demanded, what legislation did you support to ensure it never happens again? Silence. What gun reform did you support? More silence. Crockett pulled out a voting record. Let me answer for you, none. After the worst school shooting in your state's history, after 19 children in your district were murdered, you supported exactly 0 gun reforms. She read from the record. Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the modest gun safety bill that passed after Uvalde, enhanced background checks, red flag law support, closing the boyfriend loophole. You voted no. Why? Roy found his voice. That bill infringed on Second Amendment rights. Crockett's voice cut through. 19 children. 19 children in your district were killed with a weapon the shooter bought legally days after turning 18. An AR-15 style rifle that he walked into a store and purchased with no problem. And your response to that was to do absolutely nothing about how easy it is to buy weapons designed for mass killing. She pulled out more documents, Roy's statements following Uvalde. Let me read what you stated in the weeks after the shooting. June 2nd interview with a Texas radio station. The problem is not guns. The problem is fatherlessness, cultural decay, the breakdown of families and communities. Crockett sat down the statement. You blamed culture. You blamed family structure. You blamed everything except the actual weapon that killed those children. An 18-year-old purchased a military-style rifle and 375 rounds of ammunition and murdered 19 kids and 2 teachers. But you think the problem is cultural decay. Roy tried to defend himself, arguing there are multiple factors that contribute. Crockett's voice was sharp. There is one factor that matters most, the weapon. Those children were not killed by cultural decay. They were killed by bullets, high-velocity bullets from a weapon designed to inflict maximum casualties. And you refuse to do anything about access to those weapons? She pulled out testimony from Uvalde families, printed statements from congressional hearings. I have testimony here from Uvalde parents who came to Washington begging for action. Kimberly Mata-Rubio, whose daughter Lexi was killed, she testified in front of Congress about watching her daughter die. Do you know what she asked for? Roy did not answer. Universal background checks, raising the age to buy AR-15s to 21, red flag laws, basic common-sense reforms supported by most Americans, including most gun owners, and you opposed all of it. Crockett's voice hardened. What did you tell the Uvalde families when they asked you to support gun reform? Roy stated, I told them I would fight to make schools safer through better security. Crockett retorted, security guards did not stop Uvalde. An armed school resource officer did not stop it. Teachers died trying to protect kids. The only thing that would have stopped it is if that 18-year-old could not walk into a store and buy an AR-15. She pulled out financial disclosure forms. But I know why you will not support gun reform. You have accepted money from the NRA. You have accepted money from gun manufacturers. You have accepted money from the gun lobby. And when it came time to choose between those donors and 19 dead children in your district, you chose the donors. Roy's voice rose, angry now. That is offensive. Crockett shot back, her voice rising to match his. What is offensive is 19 dead children and you doing nothing. That is offensive. Dead kids and your responses, thoughts and prayers and nothing else. That is what is offensive, Mr. Roy. The room was completely silent except for Crockett's voice. She gathered the Uvalde materials, her hands shaking slightly, not from nervousness but from controlled anger. Those families will never recover. Those children will never come home. Uvalde will carry that trauma forever, and you, their congressman, could not be bothered to do even the bare minimum to try to prevent it from happening again. She looked directly at Roy. You failed them, completely and utterly failed them, and you do not even have the decency to feel ashamed about it. Roy sat there, face red, unable to formulate a response that would not make things worse. Crockett took a breath, regaining her composure. But Uvalde is not the only place in your district you have failed. Let us talk about your other supposed signature issue. Let us talk about the border. She opened a new section of her folder. Because you have built your entire brand around border security, you visit the border constantly, you do photo ops there, you give speeches about the invasion, you are on Fox News every week talking about the border crisis. So surely with all that attention, you have actually accomplished something there, right? She looked at him expectantly. What have you actually done to fix the border, Mr. Roy? Chip Roy had no good answer. Jasmine Crockett pulled out photographs of Chip Roy at the border, multiple photos. Roy in a tactical vest, Roy with Border Patrol agents, Roy pointing at the Rio Grande, Roy looking stern in front of a fence. You love border photo ops, do you not, Mr. Roy? How many times have you visited the border since becoming a congressman? Roy tried to frame it positively. Many times. It is important to see the crisis firsthand. Crockett continued, dozens of times. I counted dozens of photo ops, press conferences, Fox News stand-ups. You have built an entire brand around being the border security guy. Crockett sat down the photos. So with all those visits, all that attention, what have you actually accomplished? What legislation have you passed to fix the border? Silence. Let me help you, Crockett said. The answer is nothing. You have passed nothing, but more importantly, you voted against everything that might actually help. She pulled out a bill summary. 2024. There was a bipartisan border security bill negotiated for months by Republican James Lankford and Democrat Chris Murphy. Toughest border enforcement in decades. More Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, new authority to shut down the border when crossings hit certain thresholds. It had everything Republicans stated they wanted. Crockett looked up at Roy. You helped kill it. Why? Roy's response was defensive. That bill did not go far enough. Crockett argued, it went exactly as far as Republicans had been demanding for years. Mandatory detention, expedited removal, asylum restrictions, everything you stated you wanted. But the moment it had a chance to pass, you opposed it. Why? She did not wait for him to answer. Because if the border gets fixed, you lose your main campaign issue. You need the border to be a crisis. You need chaos and disorder that you can point to and blame on Democrats. Actually solving the problem would be bad for you politically. Roy tried to object. That is completely... Crockett cut him off and pulled out Roy's fundraising emails. Is it? These are emails your campaign sent out in the weeks after you helped kill that border bill. Subject lines, border invasion continues. Democrats refuse to secure border, a crisis at the southern border. She set them down. You killed a border security bill and then fundraised off the crisis continuing. That is not governing. That is cynical political opportunism. Crockett shifted to another topic. Let us talk about Texas versus the federal government. You have supported Governor Abbott's efforts to take control of the border. You have cheered Texas defying federal immigration law. You applauded when Abbott started busing migrants to blue cities. Do you think states should be able to override federal authority on immigration? Roy tried the federalism argument. When the federal government fails to enforce the law, Crockett interrupted. That is not what I asked. Should states be able to ignore federal law when they disagree with it? Yes or no, Roy hemmed. In cases where the federal government is derelict or, Crockett demanded, yes or no, Mr. Roy, can states override federal law? Roy said, it depends on the circumstances, Crockett countered. No, it does not. Either you believe in federal supremacy on immigration, which is explicitly in the Constitution, or you do not. You cannot have it both ways. Crockett leaned forward. Because if Texas can ignore federal immigration law, can California ignore federal gun laws? Can New York ignore federal tax laws? Can blue states just decide they do not like federal policy and do whatever they want? Roy stumbled. That is different. Crockett retorted, it is not different. You only support state defiance when it is your policies. That is not principled federalism. That is just picking and choosing which laws you think matter. She pulled out images from the border, migrants in custody, overcrowded facilities, children in chain-link enclosures. These are conditions at detention facilities in your district: overcrowded, insufficient medical care, children separated from families. Even under current policy, you visited these facilities, you have seen these conditions, and you voted against funding to improve them. Why? Roy's answer was cold. We should not be encouraging illegal immigration by making detention comfortable. Crockett's voice was hard. These are human beings. Many of them are asylum seekers, which is legal under both U.S. and international law. They are not criminals. They are people fleeing violence and poverty. And you are fine with them suffering in detention because you think it sends a message. She set down the images. You talk constantly about law and order, about following the law, but you support vigilante groups at the border. You have posed for photos with people who claim to be defending the border by confronting migrants directly. You support Texas ignoring federal court orders. You only care about law when it serves your political purposes. Roy tried to defend himself, but Crockett kept pushing. Here's what I think about your border stance, Mr. Roy. I think you do not actually want to fix it. I think you need it to be broken because it is your best campaign issue. I think you grandstand and perform because that is easier than governing. She gathered her border materials. Uvalde taught us you will not act when children die. The border situation shows us you will not act even when you claim it is a crisis. You are all theater and no results, all performance and no governance. She opened her last section of documents. But maybe you would argue that is unfair. Maybe you would say you have principles, that you are a fiscal conservative fighting against government spending. So let us examine that. Let us look at your supposed fiscal conservatism. She pulled out Roy's voting record on spending bills. Because I think you are a fraud on that too. Jasmine Crockett held up a simple chart showing the federal deficit by year. Mr. Roy, you call yourself a fiscal conservative. You rail against government spending. You threaten to shut down the government over deficits. You demand cuts to social programs. So let us look at your actual voting record on spending. She pointed to the chart. 2017 Trump tax cuts added $2 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. How did you vote? Roy knew where this was going, but had to answer. I voted yes, but, Crockett continued, no buts. You voted to add $2 trillion to the deficit. Let us continue. 2018 defense spending increase of $80 billion. How did you vote? I voted yes. 2019, another $20 billion defense increase. Your vote? Yes, but national defense is 2020, another $40 billion. You voted yes again. Crockett set down the chart. So when it is tax cuts for the wealthy or defense spending increases, you have no problem adding to the deficit. But let us look at what you oppose. She pulled out another voting record. Child tax credit expansion that helped millions of families. You voted no. Increased funding for school lunches. No. Health care for veterans exposed to burn pits. No. Infrastructure investment. No. Child care assistance. No. Crockett looked up from the record. You are not a fiscal conservative, Mr. Roy. You are fine with spending as long as it benefits wealthy people and defense contractors. You only pretend to care about deficits when the spending might help working families. Roy tried to explain. Tax cuts stimulate economic growth. Crockett countered. Did they? She pulled out economic data. Show me the revenue growth that paid for the Trump tax cuts. Show me how they stimulated enough growth to offset the $2 trillion cost. Roy could not provide specifics. Crockett stated, "They did not pay for themselves. Study after study showed they did not. But you voted for them anyway because they cut taxes for rich people, and that is what you actually care about." She moved to defense spending. "You vote for every defense increase. We now spend over $850 billion annually on defense, more than the next 10 countries combined. We spend more on defense than China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Germany, France, South Korea, Japan, and Australia combined. Do you ever think that might be too much?" I fell back on standard talking points. "We need a strong military to defend America." Crockett retorted, "We have the strongest military in human history. We have had it for decades. At some point, it is not about defense, it is about funneling money to contractors." She pulled out another document. "Let me read you some examples of defense waste. $600 million for planes the Air Force did not want and stated it did not need. $2 billion for tanks the Army stated it had too many of. Billions in cost overruns on the F-35 program." She set down the document. "That is waste. That is taxpayer money down the drain, but you vote for it every time because you are not actually against government spending. You are just against spending that helps regular people." Crockett shifted to entitlements. "During the debt ceiling crisis, you demanded entitlement reform. Let us be specific about what that means. You have supported raising the Medicare eligibility age to 67. You have supported changing the inflation formula for Social Security, which would cut benefits. You have supported adding work requirements to Medicaid. True or false?" Roy hedged. "I have supported examining reforms to ensure long-term solvency." Crockett stated, "That is true. You want to cut benefits." She did not let him hide behind euphemisms. "You want seniors to wait longer for Medicare. You want to reduce Social Security cost of living increases. You want to make it harder for poor people to get health care. That is what reform means in your vocabulary." She pulled out another record. "But let us talk about corporate welfare since you care so much about responsible spending. Farm subsidies, most of which go to large agribusiness corporations, not family farmers. You vote for those. Oil and gas subsidies, billions to hugely profitable companies. You vote for the tax breaks for private equity and hedge funds. You vote for those." Crockett looked directly at Roy. "You will vote to give billions to profitable corporations, but you will vote against feeding kids at school. You will vote for oil companies' subsidies, but against health care for poor people. That is not fiscal conservatism. That is using fiscal language to mask who you actually work for." Roy's face was fully red now. "I work for the taxpayers," Crockett countered. "You work for your donors." She pulled out campaign finance records. "Your top donors, oil and gas companies, real estate developers, financial services firms, defense contractors. The same industries that benefit from the spending you support and the tax cuts you vote for." She set down the finance records. "Here is what I see, Mr. Roy. You are a fake fiscal conservative. You explode the deficit with tax cuts for the rich and defense spending, then demand cuts to programs that help working people to pay for it. You create the crisis, then use it to justify hurting vulnerable Americans." Roy tried to respond but could not formulate a coherent defense. Crockett gathered all her materials, the January 6th documents, the Uvalde photos, the border records, the fiscal analysis, everything. "So let me bring this all together, Mr. Roy." She looked at him with something between contempt and pity. "You voted to overturn an election after an insurrection. You accomplished nothing except obstruction and chaos. After 19 children were murdered in your district, you did nothing. You kill bipartisan border solutions and fundraise off the continued crisis. And you are a fake fiscal conservative who only cares about deficits when they might help poor people." She paused. "That is your record. That is who you are. And I have one final question for you." Jasmine Crockett organized all her documents into a neat stack, the visual representation of Chip Roy's failures all in one pile. "Mr. Roy, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer honestly if you are capable of it." She looked at him, her expression serious. "What exactly are you doing in Congress besides performing for Fox News?" Roy's mouth opened and closed. His face cycled through expressions. Anger, defensiveness, calculation about how to respond. I represent my constituents, he started. By doing what? Crockett interrupted. Shutting down the government, voting against their interests. 19 children in Uvalde died and you did nothing. Your district needs border solutions and you kill them. Your district has veterans who needed burn pit health care and you voted against it. What are you actually doing for them? Roy tried to pivot to accomplishments. I have introduced legislation that went nowhere, Crockett finished for him. I asked what you have accomplished, not what you have proposed. What have you actually passed? What problems have you actually solved? Silence. Name one bill you have authored that became law, just one. More silence. You cannot, can you? 3 years in Congress and you have not passed a single bill, but you have been on Fox News 247 times. I counted. She pulled out the exact number from her research. 247 Fox News appearances in 3 years. That is more than one every 5 days. You are on TV constantly, but you have accomplished nothing legislatively, because that is not what you are here for. You are here to perform. Crockett's voice got harder. You have built a career on being loud and aggressive, interrupting people, talking over people, particularly women. You did it 6 times in this hearing alone before I called you out. You think that is strength. You think that makes you a fighter. Roy started to interrupt, proving her point, but Crockett's voice cut through. I am not finished. You do not get to interrupt me like you interrupt everyone else. For once in your life, you are going to sit there and listen. The authority in her voice made Roy actually sit back. You are a bully, but bullies are always weak underneath. That is why they bully. Because they cannot compete on substance, they cannot win arguments with facts or logic, so they try to win through intimidation. She leaned forward. But I do not intimidate. And now that I have called you out, everyone can see what you really are. Not a strong conservative fighter, just someone who is loud and mean and accomplishes nothing. Crockett pulled out one more document. This one seemed to hurt Roy more than anything else. You know who else operated the way you do? Your old boss, Ted Cruz. Roy visibly flinched at the name. Cruz is one of the most hated members of the Senate, disliked by his own colleagues, famous for grandstanding, for shutting down the government in 2013, for accomplishing nothing except getting attention. Even other Republicans cannot stand him, and you are following his exact playbook. She read from an article about Cruz. Senator Cruz mistakes theatrics for leadership and attention for accomplishment. That was a Republican senator saying that about Cruz. It applies perfectly to you, too. Crockett set down the article. You interned for Cruz, you worked for Cruz, you learned from Cruz, and you are making the same mistakes he made. You think being the loudest voice in the room makes you important, but it just makes you annoying. You think obstruction is the same as governing, but it is not. She gathered her materials one final time. Let me tell you what I see when I look at your record, Mr. Roy. I see someone who came to Congress not to solve problems, but to build a brand. I see someone who would rather be on TV than in committee actually working. I see someone who cares more about his next Fox News hit than his constituents. Her voice dropped, became more cutting. I see someone who let 19 children in his district die and did nothing. I see someone who grandstands about the border but kills solutions. I see someone who claims to be a fiscal conservative but votes to explode the deficit as long as it helps rich people. She looked directly at Roy. Most of all, I see a bully. Someone who spent years interrupting colleagues, talking over women, being aggressive and condescending, because that is all you know how to do. You cannot compete on ideas, so you try to dominate through volume and aggression. Crockett's final words were delivered calmly, but they landed like punches. You came into this room today thinking you could intimidate me like you intimidate everyone else. You thought you could interrupt me, talk over me, dismiss me. You have done it to every other woman on this committee. She paused. But I do not back down from bullies. I do not yield to men who think being loud makes them right. And I do not let people like you get away with accomplishing nothing while pretending to be effective. Another pause. You are not effective, Mr. Roy. You are not a fighter. You are not a conservative warrior. You are just an empty suit with a loud voice and a Fox News contract. And now everyone watching knows it." The room was completely silent. Chip Roy sat there, face red, hands gripping his papers, unable to formulate any response that would not make things worse. The chairman tried weakly to move on. "Perhaps we should return to the amendment under consideration." But everyone knew the hearing was over. Nothing that happened next would matter. Chip Roy had been completely, publicly, devastatingly exposed. And Jasmine Crockett calmly organized her papers and waited for the vote. She had done what she came to do. The bully had been checked. The Rules Committee finished its business in awkward silence. The amendment passed. The bill was marked up. Members filed out, but nobody was talking about the legislation. Within 10 minutes, the clips were everywhere. "I am not finished. I am. You do not get to interrupt me like you interrupt everyone else. You are going to sit there and listen." 3 million views in the first hour. "You are not a fighter. You are just an empty suit with a loud voice and a Fox News contract." 5 million views by evening. The Ted Cruz comparison instantly viral, trending on Twitter with the hashtag #CruzJR. 19 children died and you did nothing. The clip that hurt the most, shared by gun safety advocates, Uvalde families, educators across the country. The news cycle moved fast, but this story had legs. CNN ran it as a lead. Heated exchange in House Rules Committee. They played the full 7-minute confrontation, brought in analysts to discuss the implications. MSNBC went deeper. The bully gets called out. They did a full segment on Roy's history of interrupting colleagues, particularly women, and how Crockett had finally stood up to it. Even Fox News could not ignore it, though they tried to frame it differently. Democratic representative goes after Texas congressman. But they had to show the clips, and the clips spoke for themselves. The conservative media ecosystem struggled with how to defend Roy. The Daily Wire tried, "Crockett disrespects Texas congressman." But their comment section was mixed, even some conservatives admitting Roy had been out of line with his constant interrupting. Breitbart went with, "Squad member attacks Freedom Caucus conservative." But they could not make it stick. Crockett was not squad adjacent, and Roy looked bad in the footage. Right-wing Twitter tried to rally around Roy, but it was half-hearted. Many conservatives were privately relieved someone had finally told them to shut up. Because here's the secret, a lot of Republicans could not stand Chip Roy either. Behind closed doors, the Republican response was telling. In the cloakroom, one GOP member was overheard saying, "About damn time someone called out his bullshit." Another, "He has been interrupting people for years. Crockett just said what we are all thinking." Even Freedom Caucus members were frustrated, not with Crockett, but with Roy for making them look bad. A text leaked from one Freedom Caucus member to another. Chip handed her the ammunition and then stood still while she fired. What an idiot. Leadership was furious, not at Crockett, at Roy. He had made Republicans look like bullies who cannot defend their positions. He had given Democrats a massive viral moment. And he had done it by being exactly the aggressive, condescending jerk everyone already knew he was. One leadership aide told Politico anonymously, "Chip's greatest skill is making enemies. He just made another one, except this time millions of people watched." Jasmine Crockett's phone did not stop ringing. Interview requests from every major outlet, speaking invitations from across the country, fundraising emails that crashed her campaign servers because so many people were trying to donate at once. She did selective interviews, keeping her message consistent and measured. On CNN Day, "I was not trying to have a viral moment. I was trying to do my job. But I am not going to sit quietly while a colleague interrupts everyone, particularly women, and acts like that is acceptable behavior. Someone had to say something." On MSNBC, "Chip Roy represents everything wrong with modern Congress, all performance, no governance, all noise, no solutions. He votes to overturn elections, does nothing after children are murdered in his district, and then acts like he is a principled conservative." He needed to be called out. In an NPR interview, I have watched him interrupt colleagues for months, women specifically. He talks over them, dismisses them, condescends to them. I decided I was not going to be one more woman who yielded to his bullying, and I think a lot of people related to that. Everyone who has had a boss or a colleague who tries to dominate through aggression rather than competence. Her core message never changed. Roy is a bully who accomplishes nothing, and bullies need to be confronted. The political impact was immediate. Democrats found their voice on calling out Republican obstruction. Crockett had modeled how to do it, calmly with receipts without backing down. Other Democratic members started pushing back more forcefully when Republicans interrupted or grandstanded. The Rules Committee became a noticeably different place. Roy was quieter. Other Republicans were more careful, but the real impact was in Roy's district. TX21, which includes parts of Austin and the Hill Country, had always been solidly Republican. Roy had won by 11 points in 2022, but within days of the viral moment, a Democratic challenger emerged. A former prosecutor named Sarah Martinez announced she would run against Roy in 2024. Her announcement video opened with a clip of Crockett saying, "19 children died and you did nothing." Martinez's message was simple. Chip Roy is all talk and no results. He has been in Congress 3 years and has not passed a single bill. He grandstands while accomplishing nothing. TX21 deserves better. The polls shifted almost immediately. Roy's favorability in his own district dropped from +12 to +6 in 2 weeks. 6 weeks after the Rules Committee confrontation, Chip Roy was noticeably different. He was quieter in committee, still conservative, still oppositional, but he had stopped interrupting people as much. When he did try to talk over someone, other members would call him out. "Mr. Roy, the gentlewoman has the floor." He knew everyone was watching now, waiting for him to be the bully again so they could clip it and make it viral. He appeared less frequently on Fox News. When he did appear, hosts asked him about the confrontation. He tried to dismiss it. That was just partisan theater. But he could not escape it. In one Fox interview, the host asked, "Do you think you were too aggressive with Representative Crockett?" Roy's answer was defensive. "I think I was asking legitimate questions about her amendment." "But you did interrupt her 6 times before she pushed back. Do you see how that looks?" Yeah. Even Fox was not giving him cover anymore. 3 months after the confrontation, Politico published a deep dive, The Decline of Chip Roy. The article documented how Roy's influence had waned since the Crockett moment. Committee assignments he had wanted, denied. Amendments he had proposed, voted down, even by some Republicans. Leadership positions passed over. One anonymous Republican House member told Politico, "Chip made himself toxic. Nobody wants to be associated with the guy who got destroyed by Jasmine Crockett. He is damaged goods." The article noted that Roy's primary challenger, a more moderate Republican businessman, was gaining traction and fundraising well. Roy's 2024 re-election, once considered safe, now looked competitive from both directions. A moderate in the primary, a Democrat in the general. 6 months later, Jasmine Crockett was asked about the confrontation in an interview. "Do you ever watch the clips? They have been viewed over 100 million times across platforms." Crockett shook her head. "No, I was there. I know what happened." "Do you regret anything you said?" "No, everything I said was true and documented. He needed to be called out, and I called him out. Some people say you were too harsh. Some people think women should be nice and quiet, even when men are being bullies. I am not one of those people." Crockett leaned forward. "Chip Roy built a career on interrupting people and being aggressive. Someone had to tell him to stop, and I'm glad it was me." "What do you think the lasting impact will be?" Crockett thought for a moment. "I think it showed that bullies can be beaten, that you do not have to accept aggressive, condescending behavior from colleagues, that someone who is all noise and no substance can be exposed." She paused. "But more than that, I think it showed people that Democrats can fight back. We do not have to be polite when Republicans are being obstructionist. We do not have to yield when they try to talk over us. We can call them out with facts and receipts, and we should." 1 year after the confrontation, Chip Roy announced he would not seek re-election. The statement was brief, wrapped in language about spending more time with family and exploring other ways to serve. Everyone knew the truth. He could not win. The moderate Republican had built a strong primary challenge. The Democrat was raising serious money, and Roy's brand, the tough conservative fighter, had been permanently damaged. He had been exposed as a bully who cannot defend his positions, as someone who was all performance and no substance, as a congressman who had accomplished nothing in 3 years except getting on TV. The political obituaries were brutal but honest. Politico. Chip Roy's career shows the limits of pure obstruction. You cannot build a lasting political career on just being loud and aggressive. The Texas Tribune. Roy represented a particularly toxic brand of politics. All confrontation, no compromise. His downfall began when someone finally confronted him back. 2 years later, a political science class at UT Austin studied the Crockett-Roy confrontation. The professor showed the full 7-minute clip, then led a discussion. What made this moment effective? Students raised hands. She had receipts. She did not just attack him, she cited his record. She did not back down. When he tried to interrupt, she held her ground. She stayed calm while he got angry. It made him look worse. She connected it to real consequences. Uvalde, the border, fiscal hypocrisy, it was not just personal. The professor nodded. All correct. This is what accountability looks like. Not just criticism, but documented evidence of failure. Not just pushback, but sustained argument. Not just viral moments, but actual political impact. One student raised a hand. What happened to Roy? He is a lobbyist now, makes good money representing oil and gas companies, but his political career ended that day in the Rules Committee, because once you are exposed as all bark and no bite, you cannot recover. Another student. And Crockett? The professor smiled. She is in her 5th term, just became minority whip. She is one of the most effective members of Congress because she learned something important early. You cannot let bullies get away with it. Someone has to check them. 5 years later, Jasmine Crockett was asked to speak at a women's leadership conference. Her topic, when to fight back. She opened with the Crockett-Roy clip. The audience erupted in applause before it even finished. That moment happened because I made a decision, Crockett said. I decided I was not going to be one more woman who let a man talk over her and get away with it. She paused. We all face bullies, in workplaces, in politics, in life. People who try to dominate through aggression rather than competence. People who mistake volume for validity. The question is, do you let them? Do you yield? Do you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or do you fight back? Crockett's voice got stronger. I am not saying you should fight every battle. Pick your moments. Have your facts ready. Stay calm. Do not let them pull you into emotional territory. But when the moment comes, when you have the receipts, when you have the moral high ground, when you know you are right, do not back down, do not yield, fight back. Because bullies only win when good people stay quiet. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Somewhere in Texas, Chip Roy saw clips of Crockett's speech on Twitter. He thought about responding, defending himself, relitigating the confrontation. He did not, because there was nothing to say. She had been right about him. All noise, no substance, all performance, no governance. A bully who got checked and never recovered. He closed Twitter and went back to his lobbying work. It paid better than Congress anyway.